Windows. Windows is the most famous operating system on Earth, and it didn't even start as a full OS. Back in 1985, Microsoft released Windows 1.0 as just a colorful skin for MS-DOS. It looked blocky, slow, and limited, but it planted the seed. Over the years, Windows evolved into the powerhouse we know today, with legendary versions like Windows 95, XP, 7, and now Windows 11. Why does it dominate? Flexibility. Windows can run on almost any laptop or PC brand. Gamers love it for its performance and DirectX support. Office workers depend on it for Microsoft Office, and developers can use it for coding. But this dominance comes at a price. Windows is infamous for forced updates, random bugs, and the dreaded blue screen of death, which has haunted users since day one. It's also the biggest target for hackers and viruses, simply because everyone uses it. Windows is the definition of powerful but frustrating. It's the operating system you can't live without, but sometimes wish you could. macOS. macOS, launched in 2001, is Apple's answer to Windows. Unlike Microsoft, Apple doesn't share its system with anyone. macOS only runs on Macs, MacBooks, iMacs, and Mac Studios. This tight control is Apple's greatest strength. The hardware and software are perfectly designed for each other, which makes macOS smooth, stable, and nearly crash-proof. Creative professionals, video editors, designers, and musicians swear by it. Apps like Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro are industry favorites, and if you own an iPhone or iPad, everything syncs effortlessly. Texts, files, even phone calls. But macOS also comes with big downsides. First, the price tag. If you want macOS, you have to buy Apple hardware, and Apple never plays cheap. Second, gaming is basically non-existent. Without DirectX or high-end GPUs, Macs are terrible for serious gaming. Third, certain professional apps only exist on Windows. So macOS is polished, reliable, and great for creative work. But unless you're already in Apple's world, the cost and limits can be deal-breakers. Linux. Linux isn't just one system, it's a family. Born in 1991 by Linus Torvalds, Linux was built to be free and open source, meaning anyone can use it, change it, or build their own version. That's why there are countless distros like Ubuntu, Fedora, and Debian. Some are designed for everyday users, others power servers, and some run on tiny, embedded devices. What makes Linux special is its efficiency and security. It can run on an old, dusty computer or a massive NASA supercomputer. It's the go-to choice for programmers, cybersecurity experts, and web servers. Google, Facebook, and even NASA rely heavily on Linux. But here's the catch. Linux is not beginner-friendly. Many versions use command-line controls instead of easy menus, which can scare off new users. Plus, most mainstream apps and games are built for Windows or macOS, meaning you often need workarounds. Linux is the system for tinkerers, experts, and rebels who want freedom from big corporations. But for the average person, it feels like learning a whole new language. Chrome OS. Google introduced Chrome OS in 2011 with one idea. What if your computer was basically just a web browser? That's exactly what Chrome OS is, a lightweight, internet-first operating system. It comes preloaded on Chromebooks, which are cheap, fast, and especially popular in schools. Chrome OS boots in seconds, updates quietly in the background, and rarely crashes. It's incredibly secure since most of your files live in Google's cloud, not your device. On top of that, you can install Android apps from the Google Play Store, giving it more versatility than people expect. But Chrome OS has limits. Without Wi-Fi, it feels almost useless. Heavy-duty tasks like video editing, Photoshop, or high-end gaming are nearly impossible unless you use cloud services like GeForce Now, which themselves need blazing internet. And multitasking? Don't expect to run demanding apps side by side. Chrome OS is perfect if you live online, streaming, browsing, writing documents, but it crumbles when pushed outside that bubble. Android. Android is the most popular mobile operating system on the planet, powering billions of smartphones. Created by Google, Android runs on brands like Samsung, OnePlus, and Xiaomi. Unlike Apple's walled garden, Android is open source, which means manufacturers and users can customize almost every detail. Themes, widgets, launchers, your phone can look and behave exactly how you want. The Google Play Store offers millions of apps and games, and Android devices come in every price range, from budget phones under $200 to luxury flagships packed with insane cameras and power. But Android's strength is also its weakness. Because so many companies make Android phones, not all devices get regular updates. Some phones stop getting security patches within 2 years, leaving users exposed. Bloatware is another problem. Manufacturers pre-install useless apps that slow down performance. And while Android can be powerful, it often feels less optimized than iOS, with occasional lag or crashes. Android is freedom at its best and chaos at its worst. It gives you options Apple never will, but not every option is great. iOS, released by Apple in 2007 alongside the first iPhone, is the complete opposite of Android. Apple controls every aspect, hardware and software, creating an ecosystem that feels seamless. iPhones get years of software updates, so even a 5-year-old iPhone still runs smoothly. The App Store is curated and secure, making it the first stop for developers launching new apps. Apple's ecosystem is where iOS shines. Your iPhone talks to your iPad, Mac, Apple Watch, and even AirPods effortlessly. For many people, that seamless experience is addictive. But iOS comes with handcuffs. You can't install apps outside the App Store. Customization is limited compared to Android. Transferring files without Apple's system is a nightmare. And of course, Apple charges premium prices while reusing designs year after year. iOS is like living in a luxury hotel. Beautiful, safe, and efficient, but you live by the hotel's rules. Unix. Before Windows, macOS, or Linux, there was Unix. Created in the late 1960s at AT&T's Bell Labs, Unix was one of the first operating systems built for multitasking and multiple users at once. It wasn't designed for casual home use, it was made for servers, science labs, and corporations that needed raw computing power. Unix became the blueprint for nearly every modern OS. macOS, Linux, and even parts of iOS all trace their roots back to Unix. That's why it's often called the grandfather of modern computing. But here's the thing, Unix is expensive. Licensing can cost thousands of dollars per user, which makes it impractical for most people. Instead, you'll find it behind the scenes in critical systems, banking, scientific research, even weather forecasting at the National Weather Service. Unix isn't flashy, and you'll probably never touch it directly, but without it, today's tech world wouldn't exist. BSD. BSD, short for Berkeley Software Distribution, spun off from Unix in the 1970s at the University of California, Berkeley. Unlike commercial systems, BSD was open for research and development, which gave it unique strength. BSD isn't common on personal laptops, but it powers some surprising platforms. The PlayStation 4 and 5 both run on BSD-based systems. Netflix uses BSD to deliver your shows and movies worldwide. Firewalls like pfSense rely on BSD stability to protect networks. Why BSD? Efficiency and rock-solid reliability. It can handle massive workloads without breaking a sweat. Versions like FreeBSD, OpenBSD, and NetBSD each specialize in different areas from security to portability. The downside is that BSD never built a big consumer following. It's mainly used by experts, not casual users. But behind the scenes, BSD quietly powers a huge chunk of the internet and gaming industry without most people ever realizing it. They promised innovation, they delivered frustration. From frozen desktops to lawsuits and lost dreams, these are the operating systems that crashed harder than their users' patience. 8 disasters in code, each one a reminder that progress sometimes needs a reboot. Windows, Longhorn. There was a time between the glory of XP and the chaos of Vista when Microsoft whispered a single word that would change everything: Longhorn. They promised glassy transparency, instant search, 3D graphics that felt alive. This was supposed to be the future your PC, reimagined. But what we got was a Frankenstein of ambition and bugs. Longhorn was the tech world's equivalent of Icarus. It flew too close to the sun on glossy aero wings and melted mid-flight. Every week, new builds leaked online, each one more unstable than the last. Boot it up, and you'd be lucky if the desktop appeared before the crash report. Developers called it Vista's haunted prototype. Fans called it Windows XP with delusions of grandeur. It had dreams, but no discipline. By 2005, Microsoft hit the panic button and scrapped the whole thing. What rose from its ashes became Windows Vista, which, as we'll see later, wasn't exactly redemption. Longhorn wasn't just a failure, it was a warning that even the giants can dream too big for their own code. Windows ME. The year 2000, when everyone thought computers were going to explode from the Y2K bug. Microsoft's answer to the new millennium? Windows ME. Officially, it stood for Millennium Edition, but for anyone who actually used it, it meant massive error. The operating system that crashed before you even had time to hit save. It was supposed to be the fun, family-friendly upgrade to Windows 98, a bridge to the future. Instead, it was a bridge to frustration. Programs froze mid-launch, drivers disappeared overnight, and the blue screen of death became a daily ritual. It was like Microsoft stuffed every possible bug into one shiny box and said, good luck. Sure, it added Internet Explorer 5.5 and the first version of Windows Movie Maker, but what's the point of editing videos if the system crashes before you can render? Within a year, users fled back to Windows 98 or waited for XP, which felt like salvation. Windows ME wasn't just bad software, it was a public meltdown, a cautionary tale of what happens when you ship a patch and call it a revolution. MS-DOS 4. Before Windows, before GUIs, before the mouse became king, there was DOS. Simple, reliable. Until version 4 showed up like a drunk uncle at a family reunion. MS-DOS 4 was supposed to be the next step in computing more powerful, more efficient. Instead, it crashed so often that users joked it stood for mostly stops doesn't operate successfully. It froze. It corrupted files. It even refused to talk to some hardware that worked perfectly fine in older versions. Imagine upgrading your car only to find out it can't drive uphill anymore. That was DOS 4. Sure, it introduced a few neat ideas, a rudimentary graphical interface, mouse support if you had the right driver, even some color options, but none of it mattered when your system locked up just trying to copy a file. For many, it marked the first time people realized an update could make things worse. When DOS 5 arrived and finally fixed the mess, users cheered like prisoners being released. MS-DOS 4 was left behind a relic of instability, buried under its own bugs. The incompatible time-sharing system. Long before Windows, before Apple, before anyone cared about user-friendly, there was the incompatible time-sharing system, or ITS. Built in the late 1960s at MIT by some of the brightest hackers of their time, it was a masterpiece of chaos. The name said it all, incompatible. It only ran on a few massive computers the size of refrigerators, and it didn't play nice with anything else. Forget your fancy folders. This system gave every user a single directory. No subfolders, no organization. Just dump everything in the same digital closet and hope you can find it later. Passwords? None. Anyone could log into anyone's account and edit their files. In a weird way, it ran on mutual respect and academic politeness, a digital Wild West where vandalism was rare because everyone knew who the sheriff was. Still, ITS was a beautiful disaster, a system that captured the curiosity of its creators but broke every rule of security and order. It wasn't just incompatible with other computers, it was incompatible with sanity itself. Java OS. In the mid-90s, Sun Microsystems had a dream to make an operating system that could run anywhere, on anything. That dream became Java OS. Built entirely in the Java language, it was supposed to be small, fast, and universal. From ATMs to pages to early net computers, this was the system that promised to connect the world. But in reality, it connected nothing. Java OS crawled instead of sprinted. Its code, written in Java rather than C, made it painfully slow even by 90-second standards. It was like trying to run a marathon wearing cement shoes. Companies licensed it, hyped it, and then quietly pretended it didn't exist. Even Sun's own Java Station computers, the one device that actually used it, gathered dust in labs and closets. By 1999, Java OS was discontinued, remembered only by developers who had to explain why their Run Anywhere software refused to run anywhere at all. In hindsight, it was a bold experiment born ahead of its time, but also proved that dreams of universal software can crash just as hard as buggy code. Java OS didn't fail because it was broken. It failed because the world wasn't ready for it, and maybe it wasn't ready for the world. Windows Vista. Windows Vista was supposed to be the next great leap, sleek design, futuristic glass windows, and a brand new heart beating underneath it all. It looked like the future. It felt like the future, until you actually tried to use it. Vista demanded power, like a diva demanding spotlight. The moment you installed it on your old XP machine, your computer wheezed like it was climbing Everest. It was stunning and stunningly slow. The new Aero interface devoured your RAM. Drivers didn't work, printers refused to print, keyboards ghosted mid-sentence, and then there was the infamous user account control popping up every time you tried to breathe, asking, "Are you sure?" People didn't upgrade, they escaped. Some even went back to XP just to feel safe again. To be fair, later service packs fixed much of it, but by then, Vista's reputation was already sealed in tech history, the operating system that tried too hard to be modern and ended up aging overnight. It wasn't evil, just over-engineered, misunderstood, and crushed under the weight of its own ambition. A beautiful failure like a luxury car that looks gorgeous in the showroom but stalls at every red light. Windows 8. Windows 8 was the moment Microsoft forgot who its audience was. In an age where tablets and smartphones were rising fast, they tried to merge it all one interface to rule them all. The result? A system that felt like it didn't know what it wanted to be. Gone was the beloved Start button, replaced by a giant, tile-covered touchscreen layout that looked more like a toy store display than an operating system. Users booted it up and froze, staring at colorful squares asking, "Where's my desktop?" Simple actions like closing a window turned into puzzles. There were gestures nobody knew existed, settings buried under layers of confusion, and the infamous charms bar that appeared only when you moved your mouse just right. It was an OS that punished you for not being psychic. To their credit, Windows 8 introduced faster boot times, better security, and a modern design language. But none of that mattered when people couldn't even figure out how to shut down their computers. Windows 8 wasn't just a failure of design, it was a failure of empathy. A system made for touchscreens in a world still running on keyboards. Lindows. Back in 2001, a group of developers had a bold idea. Take Linux, dress it up to look like Windows, and sell it to the masses. They called it Lindows. The goal was simple: make Linux easy enough for anyone to use while secretly giving Microsoft a headache. The problem? It barely worked. Lindows promised that you could run Windows applications on Linux using a built-in compatibility layer called Wine. In theory, that meant freedom. In practice, it meant crashes, bugs, and the sad realization that your favorite programs still didn't run. Then came the legal storm. Microsoft sued, claiming the name was too close to Windows. The case made headlines and unbelievably, Lindows won. But victory didn't save them. Microsoft eventually paid $20 million just to buy the name, and Lindows quietly rebranded to Linspire. Despite a few clever ideas, the dream fizzled. It was too slow for Linux fans and too weird for Windows users. Lindows became the punchline of tech history, proof that you can't copy greatness with duct tape and wishful thinking. It didn't just blur the line between Linux and Windows. It tripped over it, sued someone, and disappeared into obscurity. Every crash, every failure, every fatal error in this list built the systems we use today. Because the truth is, progress doesn't come from perfection. It comes from the bugs, the glitches, and the courage to start again. So, the next time your computer freezes, just remember, at least it's not running Lindows, the OS that was too private for certain governments. Tails OS is one of the few operating systems built with a single purpose: erase everything. No logs, no history, no digital footsteps. Once your session ends, Tails forgets you existed, almost like an extremely secure goldfish. Journalists, whistleblowers, privacy advocates, and ordinary users rely on it because it pipes all network traffic through Tor and stores nothing on your device unless you specifically ask it to. But this level of privacy becomes a problem the moment a government prefers surveillance over security. Several countries move to restrict or ban the use of Tails because it makes user activity untraceable. It wasn't that the OS was dangerous, it was that its invisibility made monitoring impossible. For regimes that rely on control, an untraceable computer is basically a ghost with Wi-Fi. Some national agencies even issued internal briefs warning about Tails, not because criminals were using it more than anyone else, but because officials realized they couldn't gather intelligence from a system designed to wipe its memory clean every single time it powers off. The irony is that Tails only became dangerous to governments because it worked exactly as intended. The OS that looked too much like Windows, ReactOS. ReactOS is an open source attempt to rebuild Windows from scratch. Not copy it, not clone it, but recreate its behavior using entirely original code. It's one of the most ambitious projects in OS history, like trying to reverse engineer a jet airplane by staring at it through a window. The goal was noble: give the world a free Windows-compatible operating system that could run legacy apps and drivers without licensing fees. But because it mimicked Windows so closely, several institutions quietly banned or blacklisted it due to legal uncertainty. If Microsoft ever decided ReactOS crossed the line into infringement, anyone using it, especially government offices, could be caught in a lawsuit crossfire. Early builds were incredibly unstable. Icons vanished, drivers crashed, menus froze. One user joked that React OS crashed before the desktop finished loading, which didn't inspire confidence for large-scale deployment. Certain countries and organizations simply prohibited its use outright, not because React OS was malicious, but because its legal ambiguity and technical fragility made it too risky for official adoption. The OS wasn't banned for wrongdoing, it was banned to avoid the possibility of future drama. The OS that embarrassed a government. Red Star OS 2.0. Red Star OS is North Korea's state-built operating system designed to enforce strict control and maintain ideological purity. It features a custom browser, custom text editor, custom everything, all heavily monitored. The OS even watermarks files internally so authorities can trace who shared what. But despite this obsessive control, Red Star 2.0 became the punchline of an international cybersecurity conference when researchers hacked it so thoroughly they replaced its startup sound with Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up. That hack spread globally, and soon the world was laughing at an embarrassed regime whose official OS got rickrolled. The government response was swift. The older Red Star version was banned internally, replaced by a lockdown rebuild with tighter kernel modifications and reduced attack surfaces. They upgraded mandatory encryption, patched vulnerabilities, and removed anything that previously allowed foreign researchers to toy with the system. Red Star 3.0 became significantly harder to modify, not because they feared criminals, but because they feared humiliation. In an environment where image matters, an OS that could be manipulated into meme territory became unacceptable. So, the earlier version was effectively erased from official use. The OS that triggered global restrictions, early Harmony OS. Harmony OS was caught in the crossfire of global politics long before it matured as a platform. When international trade restrictions struck Huawei, governments worldwide began re-evaluating whether their infrastructure should rely on software or hardware connected to foreign vendors. Early Harmony OS builds weren't banned for technical reasons, they were banned out of geopolitical caution. Some nations restricted its use in telecom networks, government systems, and critical infrastructure simply because they feared potential backdoors or dependency risks. It didn't help that Harmony OS was still evolving and in some cases shared components with Android, causing additional confusion about its internals. To policymakers, ambiguity is a security risk. Better to block it than to audit it endlessly. Ironically, these restrictions occurred before Harmony OS had a chance to demonstrate reliability or transparency. It was essentially banned for what it might become, not what it was. This made it one of the rare operating systems to be politically restricted on a global scale before reaching technological maturity. Harmony OS eventually improved dramatically, but the early bans highlight how operating systems aren't just technical tools, they're pieces of national strategy. Even a well-designed OS can't escape global tension. The malware-loaded Android forks that got banned. Because Android is open source, anyone can modify it, rebrand it, and ship it. That's how we get dozens of custom Android forks, some legitimate, some experimental, and some that probably should have stayed in the developer's recycle bin. A number of extremely cheap smartphones sold globally were discovered to be running Android forks preloaded with spyware, hidden trackers, crypto miners, or unremovable adware buried deep in system partitions. These weren't small issues. Some phones secretly recorded usage data and transmitted it every 15 minutes to servers that investigators couldn't even identify. Others injected ads into apps that didn't have ads. A few even harvested contact lists silently. Once these findings emerged, governments and carriers began banning uncertified Android builds outright. Google followed by blocking Play services from devices using unverified forks. In some countries, laws were drafted requiring all Android-based phones to run approved, auditable OS versions. The irony is that these forks weren't created by elite hackers. Many were simply rushed attempts by budget manufacturers trying to cut corners. But an OS that behaves like malware becomes indistinguishable from malware. So, they were banned, quarantined, and replaced with trusted alternatives. The pirated Windows builds that became public enemies. Pirated Windows builds have existed since the dawn of Windows itself, often branded as light editions or performance editions. Many promised more speed by stripping out system components. In practice, this meant someone removed random DLLs until the OS behaved like a caffeinated toddler. Things got worse when modified Windows builds started including hidden payloads, crypto miners, remote access trojans, keyloggers, or browser hijackers. Some of these builds found their way into schools, public offices, and even local government departments in certain regions. Systems slowed to a crawl, security breaches occurred, and IT teams discovered these machines weren't just pirated, they were compromised. As a result, several countries began officially banning the use of unlicensed or modified Windows builds in government institutions. Laws forced agencies to audit systems and migrate everything to verified, licensed versions. They weren't banning them for piracy, they were banning them because the security risk was catastrophic. One infamous build even played music automatically at startup, including a version that blasted the Shrek soundtrack. Amusing for users at home, catastrophic for a tax office. These builds weren't just unstable, they were liabilities. And governments had no choice but to outlaw them in official environments. The corporate ban on TempleOS. TempleOS is one of the most unusual operating systems ever created. A handmade, biblical-themed OS built with 16-color graphics, a custom programming language, and a design philosophy based on divine inspiration. It doesn't support modern networking, modern hardware, or modern security standards because it wasn't designed to. It was a personal vision turned into a functioning operating system. However, curiosity led some employees in corporate environments to install TempleOS on work machines just to experiment. IT departments quickly discovered that TempleOS interacts poorly with modern office setups. Some corporate networks crashed when TempleOS attempted to interact with legacy network drivers. Even stranger, its print handling caused unpredictable output loops. One incident involved TempleOS triggering repeated print jobs that produced pages of Bible verses across every available printer, effectively giving the company an unplanned religious sermon. IT teams panicked, HR departments questioned their life choices, and executives demanded immediate bans. Corporate security policies were updated to blacklist TempleOS entirely. It wasn't banned for wrongdoing. It was banned because it simply couldn't exist safely in enterprise ecosystems built around security, compliance, and network stability. TempleOS remains a fascinating piece of computing history, but it's incompatible with the modern world, especially offices with printers. The OS that got legally erased, Lindows OS. Lindows OS was one of the boldest and shortest-lived attempts to merge the Linux and Windows worlds. Launched in the early 2000s, its pitch was simple: run Windows apps on Linux without needing Windows. That was the dream. The reality? Microsoft immediately saw the name Lindows and said, absolutely not. Their legal team treated it like someone opened a store called McDonald's and promised better fries. Multiple lawsuits hit the project across several countries, and some courts even issued rulings that effectively banned the Lindows name from being used or sold. Retailers in certain regions were ordered to stop distributing it entirely. The funny part is that Lindows OS wasn't even that close to Windows. It used a compatibility layer that struggled to run half the apps it advertised. But the name alone caused enough confusion that judges considered it too similar. In the Netherlands, Sweden, Belgium, and even parts of the United States, the brand couldn't legally appear on shelves. The developers eventually changed the name to Linspire, but the damage was done. The OS that tried to bridge two worlds got banned for almost sounding like the bigger one. In the end, Lindows OS wasn't outlawed for technical reasons. It was banned because it poked the wrong giant.